all you cool cats and kittens. Ronnie, look at the camera. Hey. Hope you're all doing well and staying healthy. Let's get into some class reminders for this week. You can find the instructions for the magical realism exercise on Canvas. This is our last creative writing exercise for the semester, and I want you to challenge yourself the best you absolutely can. And I'm going to challenge you as well, so I hope that you will be up for it, because for this exercise, I want you to try your hand at writing a short or a flash piece. What's flash fiction, and why are we only just learning about this? Oh my god. A flash piece is just a really, really short story. But here's the kicker. The kicker? You're going to write a short piece of around 1 to 3 pages, and it must have a complete arc to it, which means beginning, middle, and end. And did I forget to mention that since this week is centered around magical realism and fabulism, the focus of your piece should be on something that's not quite in our regular world of realism, but also not quite fantasy or science fiction. Think about the genre for this week as looking at our world but in a funhouse mirror. Warp reality like the stories you read for this week and ones from before. Sea Oak, Real Women Have Bodies, even I Looked for You, I Called Your Name has some strange twists to reality when our narrator starts eating sand. Ask yourself, how can I incorporate elements of magic into this exercise without needing to spend too much time building a new world or rules? You can do this. I'm excited to see the results. If you're interested, I'll post a couple of flash pieces that I included in my thesis that play around with fabulism. You're not required to read my writing at all, and it's not going to get you bonus points anyway. But if you're interested in seeing how I approach this genre, you'll have that resource on Canvas. Okay, let's go into a very brief, very general overview of literary trends in recent history to see where magical realism and fabulism fit in this timeline, and maybe to even project future evolutions of fabulism. It's really important for me to say that this is a very condensed timeline, and there are many sub-movements that showcase writers of color during times of colonization and uprisings and revolutionary social movements. So I hope you'll check out the resources that I put on Canvas to learn more about those specific movements that are not listed in this timeline and that other people can definitely speak on in more detail than I am. You might have picked up on some patterns from the craft essays you read this week on what exactly makes fabulism or magical realism what it is. And the truth is that a lot of scholars are still trying to figure this out, and that might be the perfect testament to the genre itself. It's something that can't be put in a box or neatly defined. But what are the main elements to non-realist literature? Bernheimer says that fairy tales, both traditional and experimental, have 3 classic characteristics: flatness of the characters, intuitive logic, and normalized magic. It's almost as if the concept or message within these fabulous fairy tale stories are more important to develop than the characters themselves. But as you can see from the evolution of literary movements, these characteristics weren't always what were in style. Does that mean that one type of writing style is superior to another? And how do you know when to delve into the surreal and when to keep the story familiar? Gaviler's article claims that, quote, literary fiction is serious, everything else isn't. And this speaks to the gatekeeping within our field. And yet, we have a long history of writing outside the traditional canon, especially when it comes to fairy tales and fabulous retellings of familiar plots. Many writers who explore this style often attribute the unrestricted power of language that authors can use in fabulous writing. Carmen Maria Machado and Kelly Link actually participated in an interview on this field back in 2018. Let's go right to the sources to see what they have to say about it.
Happening. I mean, I feel like, right, like we've been writing non-realism, like people have been writing it like basically since the beginning of human storytelling. But I don't know. I think right now people are sort of looking for language to describe like the world weirdness of the world, and so it makes sense to jump into things like science fiction and fantasy and magical realism and liminal fantasy and all these things because it sort of gives people space to like have a sense of how weird everything is right now and just sort of gives shape to that idea.
So do you feel like, Kelly, do you feel like when you were writing your stories and finding a way through that you were doing something that there was a name to it, or was this just sort of a natural outgrowth of your love of fairy tales, or where did it start with for you?
It started with the things that I really love to read. When I was first publishing, I think my first story came out in maybe 1996. Um, I really thought that the kind of audience that I would have and the place that I was going to be very happy to be would be science fiction magazines. And I think what was happening right around that moment because of writers like Jonathan Lethem, but also William Gibson, Le Guin, was that there was already kind of an opening up that more writers were feeling comfortable crossing over from one genre to another, but also readers were pretty comfortable as well. So I ended up publishing in literary magazines, although that had not really been the way that I thought my career was going to go. Um, and I think that the distinction between categories has really broken down more and more. I, having been writing stories for a while, I always think, well, where's the moment where everything shuts down again? And it's been long enough now that I feel like I'm not going to see that moment, I hope. Like,
It
it's
doesn't
just going to
seem to
keep
be happening
expanding.
at all. In fact, it
Yeah.
seems to be getting bigger and
Yeah.
growing.
I can't help but think of Jamaica Kincaid's essay, A Small Place, that talks about the irony of writing against oppression with the very tongue and language the oppressors have given you. This seems to be what Machado and Link talk about in the interview, and it supports many of Kit Haggard's points too. Haggard makes sure to note that fabulism is, quote, distinct from the magical realism tradition of Latin America, but explains, quote, fabulous stories make physical what is otherwise ephemeral or ineffable in an attempt of understanding those things that we struggle with the most to talk about: loss, love, transition. Haggard goes on to say that, quote, surrealism, the queering of reality, has become a tool for accessing the reality of inhabiting a queer body, and that many queer writers approach the feeling of, quote, occupying a queer or female body by making sure that, quote, the world around their characters' bodies is strange as well. Haggard also says that sometimes there's no other way to understand the disorientation of childhood except through the Red Hood, the grandmother, and the wolf. Sometimes the experience of queerness demands a haunted house. One of the key components to magical realism, fabulism, and surrealism writing are the theories and social movements these often stem from. Consider Carmen Maria Machado's The Husband Stitch from this week, for example. Not only do we have a queer, female-identifying writer of color bringing her perspectives into this, but we get a retelling of a ghost story through a feminist lens. This story isn't a flash piece like you'll be writing, of course, but I want you to pay attention to form and language as you consider how fabulism functions as a way to push against traditional literary narratives and gatekeeping in literature and society as a whole. Even though you might not write from the place of social justice theory, or even want to explore the evolution of language throughout literary periods, I want you to try to contextualize the significance of magical realism and all its subgenres within this important movement. Good luck and have fun with this week's assignment. As always, let me know if you have any questions and try to open your mind to this, even if it's not really something you normally do. You might surprise yourself with how far your imagination can go.